For cloud security, there is a big risk in the sense that once there is a compromise, it can rapidly multiply and affect multiple industries. Before the cloud phenomenon, the blast radius of breaches was localized. Now, if a service organization gets hit, all of their customers are in trouble.
SC Media and our Diamond sponsor Darktrace are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. Each month, the CISO Stories program explores a cybersecurity topic selected by the Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community and provides content that examines that topic from a variety of perspectives. Hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, best-selling author of CISO Compass, the CISO Stories weekly podcast features content powered by 1,100 plus members of the Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community. Listen to previous CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CSC. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Solomon Ugah, the Director of GRC at Rockwell Automation. Welcome, Solomon.
Thank you, Todd. It's nice to be here.
So I'm curious, Solomon. You're in the GRC space. What attracted you to that particular niche of cybersecurity in your background?
Well, for me, it's the niche that it occupies between the technical side and the business side. Because eventually you've got to be able to translate business realities to the folks on the technical side and be able to translate the technical things to the business side as well, so that there is no disconnect in communication. Because I found that when the cybersecurity guys go about their operations, they can quickly lose sight of business objectives. So the goal of GRC, or at least the way I practice it, is to be able to reinterpret cybersecurity controls in light of the business's objectives for that particular period, and to be able to practice cybersecurity in a way that supports what the business is trying to achieve. So it could be like going after a new market or putting out a new product. There's got to be that bridge from which the business and the technical side can meet and shake hands.
Do you find that challenging? I mean, one of the toughest things I think for a lot of CISOs to get a hold of is, how do I understand the business? Especially with a lot of them growing up in technology. What was your path? Was it to move into this space? Did you grow up in the technology side of the house, or were you on the business side of the house?
Oh, I was a very technical guy. I like to say I grew up in the technical trenches, doing everything from penetration testing to risk assessment, vulnerability management. So I was super technical. After a few years, it felt like I had touched a lot of domains and I wanted a new experience. And I began to have interactions with business people. And these guys seem to think differently, right? You could determine that this risk was super high based on your own risk register. It's a super high risk. But when the business guys begin to ask you 2-3 questions, it becomes obvious to you like what you thought was super high was not really high in terms of the objectives the business was trying to pursue. So it kind of began to change my mind and how I related to cybersecurity. And so I decided to switch over to the governance side. And it has been a very interesting journey for me in terms of how, even like trying to get resources, which is something that most CISOs struggle with, how to get the business to assign resources to a particular area of risk. I think it's a communication game where you've just got to use the right words, describe it in the right way, and really understand your audience and what they care about. So I'll give you an example. If you wanted to if you wanted to deal with a new risk, you've got to find a way to rephrase it as an opportunity. Like if we go after this risk, we are actually opening up opportunity for the business. And you've got to use dollar terms. Like it's going to create new ARR of so and so $1 million, or it's going to help us sign on this much logos, new logos, or it's going to help us break into the enterprise space. That's the kind of thing that will tickle a business person, not necessarily coming to them with just technical jargons. Like they just kind of fall asleep afterwards. So it's for me, it's very interesting because I get to look at all the charts on the business side, and as these charts are being presented in my mind, I'm trying to see how we can help the business achieve these objectives securely.
How do you, I mean, I think you just started to explore that a little bit of how do you, get that business acumen to be able to have that conversation, and not only have that conversation, but build the trust that the business actually thinks, hey, this, Solomon gets it,
Yeah.
what I'm talking about. How do you do that?
Well, first thing I did was to collaborate widely, um, keeping an open mind and actually empathizing with the business folks. If a sales team has got to meet this much ARR and they come back to you asking for how do we respond to these RFPs? I've got this list of security questions. How do I respond to them? Rather than just tell them no, yes, 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 no, actually sit with them and offer to be part of the meeting, to support them and to be part of sales calls. So it kind of gives you an idea of the kind of questions that their own customers are asking them. And then it begins to shift your mindset. And genuinely participating in business development calls, right? And it kind of helps you understand the pain of the product manager, of the sales manager, of the finance manager, and opening up your worldview. As a technical person, I could bury myself in the latest tools and techniques and bells and whistles. I mean, it's kind of fun to play with those technical things, but picking up your organization's annual reports, and reading through it, or your stock or your filings with the SEC, and reading through it and see where are the pain points for your organization. Where did we actually make money from? You could be in a part of the business where you guys have spent $10 million on cybersecurity and it's a loss making venture. So you know that already, that no matter the risk you bring up, the business just wants to make money, right? So that level of exposure helps you create empathy for the other parts of the business. And then you begin to see the work you do in a different light, and helps you shift your own perspective. At least that's how it has worked for me.
I really like that approach. Today we're talking about the cloud. Yeah. And reimagining risk in the cloud. What have you observed about the cloud security landscape as it's been evolving, and the increasing trends of services migrating to the cloud?
Yeah, that's the key word, evolving. Because I don't think we have reached a steady state yet. Everyone is trying to figure it out. And how you will know is the third party risk management, which is one of the key concerns in the cloud security space. When one organization has uploaded their data with this service provider, it kind of changes their risk profile. And then you have to trust that this service organization is doing the right thing with your data. And how they will typically do is they will send you a questionnaire, like, go ahead and fill out this questionnaire. So you see all sorts, like I've seen all sorts of questionnaires, like trying to tackle different questions. Some have got a SIG-Lite list, some have got a CAIQ list, some have got an ISO list. And so it's kind of up in the air. Different practices are not aligned. Everyone is trying to do the best they can. Some people send you a questionnaire, and it's obvious that it's a questionnaire they got from their on-prem software side and just sent it to you. It doesn't really match the cloud business model. So I would say for cloud security, there is a big risk in the sense that once there is a compromise, it can rapidly multiply and affect multiple industries. Before the cloud phenomenon, the blast radius of breaches was localized. Now, if a service organization gets hit, all of their customers are in trouble. So I see more of the CISOs are very careful to sign up to cloud services, but they really can't get away from it because the best services are in the cloud. So it's a juggling game of how much risk can I tolerate? What data can I actually have in the cloud? What are the data sovereignty rules with this provider? Where does the data reside? And then they try to get into the contract small things like we reserve the right to audit you. I mean, if I'm a cloud service provider, I really wouldn't allow one individual customer audit me because it creates the risk that during the course of the audit, they may encounter the data of another customer. And if I allow one customer audit me,
what sort of contract clauses should we be having with our cloud providers?
well, I think it's the contract should pay attention to the independent auditors. If you want a class of auditors, because you are relying on the audit opinions provided by the auditors right now, since you do not have the right to audit your service provider, but they are saying that we're going to offer you a SOC 2 report where this independent auditor will come in and examine how we practice cybersecurity and then report on it, right? So you've got to be sure that the auditors are really independent and they are well regarded in the industry. And if you're going to go for a SOC 2 report or an ISO report, look at the fine details. Look at the fine details. Read those SOC 2 reports. They can go off for 100 pages, but that's where you can actually get the fine details of how that service organization is operating.
How do you evaluate an auditor to say whether they meet that standard that you're articulating?
So for me, I want to look at the kind of how they tested the controls. We know the cybersecurity frameworks are very clear on what the controls should look like. And then when you produce to me an audit report, I want to see how much rigor went into it. If for example, the framework says you should conduct vulnerability scans as part of your vulnerability management program, and then auditor is going to come in and examine how that has been practiced, I want to see how they describe those controls. Are you just saying that you saw a copy of an audit report? Did you consider the coverage? Are the networks assessed? Are the APIs assessed? Are the applications assessed? Sometimes you could get an audit report, but it doesn't quite cover the scope of services. So the auditor must know the business of the auditee, right? They must show by their audit report that they really understand that cloud security model and that they're able to interpret it correctly. So that's what I would look out for.
You mentioned a little earlier that some people were taking their on-premise type questionnaires and then sending those out for cloud type applications. Yeah. What are some of those differences between questionnaires that are geared towards on-prem versus what questions we should be asking for the cloud?
Okay. So typically for on-prem solutions, you are concerned about the supply chain for that software. You want to know that it came from the right source. It wasn't altered in transit. And you want to know that you have access to the latest updates like patches and notifications about vulnerabilities. Those are and then the third thing was that software was built using a strong and well-managed SDLC process. So those are the kind of questions you'd want to focus on. Like, what's the SDLC process behind this software that I am getting? How do I get notified about vulnerabilities? And what's the speed with which an update will be released? And then for the supply chain for that piece of software, do you have things like code signing? Do you have a software composition analysis that lets me know the provenance of the software? Those are kind of the questions one should be asking for on-prem. For on-prem, you really cannot ask about disaster recovery because it's going to be installed at the customer site. And the customer is the one who's responsible for ensuring that that software is deployed properly, change management, rollback if you have to. If it produces data, then you have to have a backup plan for a backup strategy for your data. On the cloud side, you really basically have outsourced all your security, right? You want to ask questions like, what's your data retention? Like, if I leave your service as a customer, what piece of my data do you still hold on to? Data jurisdiction. What government entity has jurisdiction over this data? Do I get notified if your government, for example, wants to run a search on my data? And then now comes about the overall security program that is governing that SaaS product, how their CISO office is laid out, their risk management practices. Pen test reports are very helpful. Background check, even the country of support, right? If I know if I'm in a highly regulated industry that says all my data should be in the US, for example, you want to know if they have support engineers from Europe or from APAC who are able to access that data. So those fine details are super important. But I think you've got to examine their whole cybersecurity program for the SaaS space. So the questions are more detailed. And you can use frameworks like CAIQ from the Cloud Security Alliance. They do a very good job in asking questions that are specific for the cloud.
So do you find that things like penetration tests and vulnerability assessments that they're willing to share that information or allow you to conduct those tests? What are you seeing with the cloud providers?
So there are two approaches. So there's one approach where the cloud service organization will not share anything with individual customers. Like you will not see their pen test reports. You will not see the details of their vulnerabilities because maybe it's classified as restricted information, but they will have to share it with their own auditors. So at that point, in your in your contract with your service provider, you can tell them that you want the independent auditors to focus on these areas and to address areas like pen test. So they must show all the fine details to the auditor. And then you're just relying on that auditor's reputation to check those documents and provide an opinion. The second approach is they would share the executive summary of the pen test report because the details, it will be a bad thing to share the details of the pen test with individual customers. And you could let them know that a cloud service provider or a cloud service customer could request for the executive summary. And all that will say is, we found 2 critical vulnerabilities, 2 have been resolved. We found 1 million vulnerability, which has been resolved. So, and just things like that, just a high level summary without going into the deep details. And the same thing also for for the vulnerability management program. It can be a summary report. So it depends on where the management team of the cloud service provider is at with that and what the cloud service customer is willing to accept.
With the movement to the cloud, which has been happening for quite some time now. I remember being asked to be on a cloud panel back in the late 2000s, and I
Yeah.
said, "Well, I don't really know anything about this because I haven't implemented this yet." And the people who were running the panel said, who actually started some of these organizations that you've referred to in the podcast, said, "Oh, it's okay, Todd. Nobody else is really implementing anything yet either. So we're all just trying to figure it out."
Exactly.
But I declined to be on the panel because I kind of have this habit of not wanting to speak about things I don't know as much about. And I've spoken on cloud since, but not at that time because I really didn't have the experience at that time. But so as we've been maturing these cloud environments, it seems like there's some concentration risk amongst some of the big players in the industry.
Yeah.
How should our companies and our risk programs be looking at this risk with a concentration amongst a few big players?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. And the way the cloud game is played, it's all about scale. If you think those guys are big right now, they are hyper scaling more and more and more. So they're only gonna get big, and they're gonna get so big where they are almost sub-government or government unto themselves. And we can't change that. What you can do is do your own risk analysis and understanding the landscape you are playing in, that there are only four big players and you really cannot do much about them. So understand your business, understand your regulatory space, do your risk assessment and determine what controls you should put in place. If you are with one provider and you are locked in, because some of the products you're actually locked in with the provider, the only way you can actually port off that provider is to shut down the product for 2-3 years and go rewrite it on a different provider. It's almost impossible to leave that provider. So in that scenario, you just have to understand this is how my business model works, and then plan around it. That it's always going to be these people. And then when you do your own contract with your cloud service customers, be very plain and very open with them. Like, this is a sub-service organization. I rely fully on, for example, AWS or Azure. So your customers are aware. And then when you sign all these things like SLAs with them, you must not promise to your customers anything higher than what these big providers are promising to you. So if you are giving if your contract with AWS is 99.99, you have to give your own customers 99.95 because you are wholly you depend wholly on these providers. You can't do better than what they are giving you. And then also beware of, and then there's a place where you have some control in terms of how you design your application. So your application should be designed such that it's flexible and can get its way around geopolitical issues. There are organizations whose data can never leave North America, and the organizations whose data must always, for example, stay in India. So when you design your applications and you build your cloud products, you must have databases that can be wholly separate. And so you don't have a situation where you have a product designed to write data back to a location, and then you have this concentration risk as well. So that if there is a geopolitical event that takes down one region, you have enough, your product is survivable and you can bring it back in another region. Mm-hmm. So architects and cybersecurity analysts and risk managers need to get together and talk and look at their products to build this resilience into the structure, so that you are sure that regional events do not take down your entire business.
I think that's a really key point. I know I worked for an organization that we were building a global application, and that would be used by all countries, and ran into, some difficulties with France and Germany and Sweden, not because their laws weren't weren't appropriate. They were appropriate for them, but what they were saying was that the data had to stay within those countries. And so how do you then have a global application where you've got a team of people that are trying to work on a service that services multiple countries like that? So we actually had to build data centers, in those particular localities, and the applications had to be architected from the start to be able to handle that.
Yeah, that's true. I've seen that over and over again. And sometimes it's not just the system itself. It could be the people that support the system. Sometimes you just have to have a European specifically for this customer alone, and then an American for this customer. And we are seeing, I see my own, the way I see the trend happening, the fracturing of this geopolitical space is going to accelerate. And so businesses, especially cloud service providers that want to stay global, have got to begin to re-architect if they have to, so that they are able to offer localized services if they have to.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been great, Solomon. What final advice would you give to emerging CISOs, new CISOs, current CISOs, experienced CISOs as they're trying to move into the cloud?
Well, the first most important thing is know your business. There are lots of people who try to go into the cloud using checklists and quick wins. Those checklists they're very effective, but they're supposed to be a starting point for you, not what you adopt wholesale. So know your business and know your providers and what they can do and what they cannot do. And control what you can control. What you can control, things like your architecture, your own internal practices, those you can control. And they say the cloud is a shared security model. So as far as lies within your own control, do have a high level of cyber hygiene, right? And then whatever you cannot control, try to use contractual means to protect your organization. And that's how the cloud works. You can't control everything. So contracts are very helpful and stay on top of things.
Well, and as CISOs, we want to control everything, but we have to face that reality sometimes, don't we?
Yeah,
well,
for sure.
Thanks a lot, Solomon. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Awesome time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to Darktrace, our diamond sponsor. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode.